Jimmy Kimmel, with his signature grin, leaned back in his chair behind a desk cluttered with cue cards and his steaming mug. The orchestra fell silent, and Jimmy, having just cracked jokes about inflation and political scandals flooding cable news, introduced his guest. "Ladies and gentlemen, Al Pacino." The crowd erupted in applause. Pacino stepped onto the stage, lean, dressed in a dark suit, his silver hair wild like a mane. At 84, he moved with confident grace, a spark in his eyes, as if he knew something no one else did. He waved, smiled, and sat down, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. "Al, always great to have you," Jimmy began, playfully tapping his pen on the desk. "You've got a new project, but let's be real. You're here to drop something juicy, right?" Pacino smiled, but it was a tight, strained smile. He glanced at the audience, at faces watching him with reverence, and his voice grew quieter, almost confessional. "Jimmy, I'm not here for laughs tonight. There's something I've been holding onto for a long time, and I've decided it's time to tell the truth." The room stilled. Jimmy, sensing the shift, leaned closer, his humor giving way to curiosity. "Okay, Al, you've got me hooked. What's this truth?" Pacino took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. "Robert De Niro. He's my brother." The words hung in the air. The audience gasped, a wave of whispers rippling through. Jimmy blinked, his usual cocksure demeanor melting away. "Wait, what? Robert De Niro? Taxi driver, raging bull? You're serious? You guys are brothers." Pacino nodded, his eyes shimmering with a mix of relief, pain, and resolve. "Yeah, Jimmy, my older brother. We grew up together in the Bronx. Dirty courtyards, cramped apartments, street fights. But life pulled us apart, and we chose to keep a secret." The audience was stunned. For those over 55 who'd grown up on Pacino and De Niro's films, this was an earthquake. Their roles in The Godfather Part 2, the diner scene, in Heat, these were cultural landmarks. And now, to learn they were brothers? It was more than a sensation. It touched their own memories of family, loss, and secrets. Jimmy, recovering, tried to lighten the mood. "Al, this sounds like a script you and Bobby could star in. You're saying you're brothers and nobody, not the press, not the fans, knew? How's that even possible?" Pacino leaned forward, his voice sharper but calm. "Because we didn't want it to be a circus, Jimmy. In the 60s, when we started, acting was our shot to escape poverty. The Bronx wasn't Hollywood. If people knew we were brothers, they wouldn't have taken us seriously, just seen us as a gimmick, the Pacino De Niro brothers. We wanted our work to speak for itself." The audience listened, breathless. Each person caught echoes of their own lives, struggles, sacrifices, compromises. But then came a bombshell. A voice, low, gravelly, familiar to everyone in the room, cut through from the wings. "You always were the better storyteller, Al." All heads turned. There stood Robert De Niro in a simple gray jacket, with the same intense features from Raging Bull. The crowd exploded, shouts, applause, shock. Jimmy leapt from his chair. "My God, Bobby, you're here? Is this planned?" De Niro stepped onto the stage, his gaze locked on Pacino. "Not exactly, Jimmy. I heard I was going to talk, and I couldn't stay away." The audience was ecstatic, but the tension between the two actors was palpable. Pacino stood, the two men just steps apart, their eyes telling a story of love, pain, and years of silence. "Why now, Al?" De Niro asked quietly. "After all these years?" Pacino's lips tightened, his voice trembling but firm. "Because I'm tired of hiding, Bobby. We've lost so much time. Because of pride, because of fear. I don't want to leave this world without telling the truth." Jimmy, sensing the moment slipping out of his control, tried to interject. "Guys, this is incredible. But let's unpack it. You grew up together, then split. Why the falling out?" De Niro looked at Pacino, as if weighing whether to reopen an old wound. Then he spoke, his voice calm but heavy. "Our mother. She tried to protect us. But when things got tough, she made a choice. Al stayed with her. I was sent to an aunt. I was older. I should have looked out for him. But I couldn't. And I never forgave myself for it. The room was silent. For those who knew the sting of family rifts, the words cut like a blade. Pacino stepped closer to De Niro, his hand brushing his shoulder. It wasn't your fault, Bobby. We were kids. But we're here now. And I want people to know who we are. Not actors. Not legends. Brothers. But then came the unexpected. A man stood from the audience, older, in a checkered shirt, hands trembling. His voice sliced through the quiet. You're lying. This is all a stunt to sell some new movie. You're not brothers, you're just acting. The room froze. Jimmy blinked, unsure how to respond. Pacino and De Niro turned to the man, and the studio's tension thickened like smoke. The man continued, his voice quaking with anger. I'm from the Bronx. I grew up in your time. Never heard of Pacino and De Niro being family. You're fooling people like you always do. A younger man beside him tried to calm him, but the older man brushed him off. I lost my brother because of lies, because of secrets. Don't you dare use this for fame. Pacino stepped to the edge of the stage, his eyes calm but piercing. Sir, I understand your pain. And I don't blame you for doubting. But this isn't a game. This is my life. Our life. He pulled a yellowed, worn letter from his pocket and held it up for all to see. This is a letter from our mother. She wrote it before she passed. It's all here, the truth about us, about why we were split up. I wouldn't ask you to take my word for it. The man in the audience fell silent, his anger giving way to doubt. De Niro stepped beside Pacino, his hand resting on his shoulder. Al's telling the truth. We're not after fame. We're after peace. Jimmy, sensing the moment could either break the show or make it legendary, stood. Okay, I'm calling for a breather. But, Al Bobby, what's next? Are you ready to share more? Pacino looked at De Niro, who gave a faint nod. We're just getting started, Jimmy, Pacino said. And we won't stop until it's all out. The crowd roared with applause, but a question lingered in the air. What lay behind this truth? And were the brothers and the world ready for what came next? The applause in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio thundered, but the tension didn't fade. The spotlight glinted off the old, yellowed letter in Al Pacino's hand, creased and worn like a relic from another life. Robert De Niro stood beside him, his face unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. Jimmy Kimmel, trying to regain control of a show that was spiraling into chaos, raised his hands to quiet the crowd. All right, he said, his voice tinged with awe and disbelief. I'll Bobby this. I don't even know what to call it. This is a historic moment, but I see there's skepticism in the room, and honestly, I'm really myself. Let's dig in. What's in that letter? Pacino looked at the letter, his fingers trembling, but his voice steady. It's from our mother, Rosie, he said. She wrote it in 1972, before she. He paused, swallowing hard. Before she passed. She knew Bobby, and I might never speak again. She wanted us to know the truth. De Niro, silent until now, stepped closer. Read it, Al, he said softly. They need to hear it. The room fell silent. Even the man in the checkered shirt, who just accused them of lying, sat down, his anger softening into curiosity. Pacino unfolded the letter, his gravelly voice filling the studio. My dear boys Alfonso and Roberto, he began. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything face to face. Life has been cruel to us, but I loved you more than I could ever show. When your father left, I couldn't keep you both. Al, you were younger, frailier. I feared you wouldn't survive without me. Bobby, you were strong, but I knew your aunt could give you a chance I couldn't. I tore our family apart so you could live. Forgive me, but never forget, you are brothers. Forever. Pacino stopped, his eyes glistening with tears he held back. The audience sat in silence, broken only by soft sniffles from a few rows. For those who'd known their own fractured families, these words hit like a punch to the chest. Jimmy, usually quick with a quip, looked lost. God, Al. He ran a hand through his hair. It's heartbreaking. But why keep it secret even after you became stars? De Niro spoke, his voice low, almost gruff. Because we were stubborn, Jimmy. I was angry at Al for staying with Mom when I didn't. He was angry at me for going my own way. We'd see each other in New York, in acting circles, but we didn't talk. And by the time we were in films, it was too late. We became Pacino and De Niro. The world didn't want two brothers from the Bronx. It wanted legends. Pacino nodded, his gaze fixed on the letter. And the worst part? We played brothers on screen, in The Godfather, in Heat, and every time it was like a knife in the heart. We knew the truth, but couldn't say it. The crowd buzzed again, whispering. A woman in the third row, with gray hair and glasses, raised her hand like a schoolgirl. Jimmy spotted her and nodded. Yes, ma'am, you have a question? She stood, her voice soft but clear. I'm from Queens, grew up in the 60s. My brother. We fell out over family stuff, too. Haven't seen him in 30 years. You say you're brothers, but how did you get here? How did you find your way back? The question hung heavy. Pacino and De Niro exchanged a glance, something unspoken passing between them, pain, hope, understanding. Pacino spoke first. It wasn't easy, he said. For years, we avoided each other. But last year I got sick. Nothing major, but it hit me that I could go without telling him what he means to me. I called Bobby, and we talked. For hours. About Mom, the Bronx, everything we lost. De Niro nodded, his face softening. I didn't want to listen at first. But Al, he wouldn't give up. He's always been like that, stubborn as a nail. And I'm glad he called. The crowd erupted in applause, but then the man in the checkered shirt stood again, his face red with anger. It's a nice story, but I don't buy it. Where's the proof? A letter? Could be a fake. You're conning us, like you always have. The studio's tension thickened like a brewing storm. Security near the stage bristled, but Pacino raised a hand, stopping them. He stepped to the stage's edge, his gaze calm but piercing. Sir, I get why you doubt, he said. You have every right. Life teaches us not to trust. But I'm not asking you to take my word. I'm asking for a chance to show the truth. He turned to Jimmy. I've got more than the letter. Photos, documents. And people who knew us back then. They're still alive. I want them to tell their story. Jimmy, sensing the show teetering on a knife's edge, seized the idea. Wait, you're saying there are witnesses? People who can confirm you and Bobby are brothers. De Niro nodded. There's one person. Our cousin Lena. She grew up with us. She's here in a... The crowd gasped. Jimmy turned to the producers, who were frantically whispering into headsets. Lena's here? In the city? You're serious. Pacino smiled, for the first time that night, a genuine, unguarded smile. She hates cameras, but I convinced her to come. She's in the green room. If the audience is ready, we can bring her out. The crowd roared with cheers and applause. The man in the checkered shirt sat, his face still tense, but he stayed quiet. Jimmy leapt up. This is officially the best show of my life. All right, let's bring out Lena. The doors behind the stage opened, and an elderly woman, about 80, with straight silver hair and a warm smile, walked out. She moved slowly but confidently, holding a small box. The room hushed, all eyes on her. Lena stopped between Pacino and De Niro, her eyes glistening with tears. My boys, she said softly, her voice quivering. I've waited so long for you to say this. She opened the box and pulled out an old photograph, two boys, about 10 and 12, standing on a Bronx sidewalk, holding hands. Even through the years, it was unmistakably Al and Bobby. This is them, Lena said, turning to the audience. My cousins. My brothers. And I'm so proud they're finally together. The crowd erupted, people rising from their seats. Jimmy, laughing and wiping his eyes, hugged Lena. Pacino and De Niro embraced briefly in that gruff, masculine way, but the hug held everything. Years of pain, forgiveness, hope. But the story didn't end there. The man in the checkered shirt, still silent, stood and headed for the exit. Pacino noticed and called out, "Sir, wait. I don't know your story, but I see it hurts. If there's anything we can do." The man stopped, his shoulders slumping. "My brother. He's gone, and he never knew I loved him. Don't do what I did. Don't wait." He left, leaving the room in silence. Pacino looked at De Niro, who nodded. They knew their truth wasn't just for them. It was for everyone carrying unspoken words in their hearts. Jimmy, trying to wrap the show on a high note, turned to the camera. "I don't know how we'll go back to jokes after this, but Al, Bobby, Lena, thank you. You've given us more than a show. You've given us hope." The applause thundered, but a sense lingered that this was only the beginning. Pacino and De Niro knew more conversations, more truths, lay ahead. But for the first time in decades, they were together. And that was worth everything. The applause in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio roared, but it carried more than the usual excitement of a TV show. It was a sound of catharsis, a shared experience that bound everyone, from the audience to the crew behind the scenes. The spotlight softly illuminated Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and their cousin Lena, who stood between them, clutching the old photograph like an anchor to their past. Jimmy Kimmel, still grappling with what had unfolded, turned to the camera, his smile genuine, but his eyes misty with emotion. "I don't know how we'll ever top this," he said, spreading his hands. "Al, Bobby, Lena, you haven't just made my show legendary. You've given us something real. Thank you." The crowd erupted again, people rising from their seats, some wiping tears. Pacino and De Niro exchanged a glance, their faces reflecting relief and vulnerability. Lena, gripping their hands tightly, smiled, her eyes glowing with warmth. But the studio still hummed with an unspoken question, as if the truth they'd revealed was just the beginning. Jimmy, sensing the moment needed closure, leaned toward Pacino. "Al, one last question," he said, his voice softer. "You and Bobby are finally together. You've told the truth. What now? What do you want people to take from this?" Pacino looked out at the audience, his gaze lingering on the empty spot where the man in the checkered shirt had stood, the man who'd accused them of lying and then bared his own pain. His words, about a brother lost without reconciliation, still echoed in Pacino's mind. He took a deep breath, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence. "I want people to talk," he said. "Don't hold on to love, anger, or truth. Life's short, Jimmy, Bobby, and I lost decades to pride and fear. Don't do that. If there's someone you need to say, 'I love you,' or 'I'm sorry' to, say it. Today." De Niro nodded, his usually stoic face softening. "And don't be afraid to be weak," he added. "Al, and I played tough guys in movies, but in life, it takes guts to be yourself. Telling the truth isn't weakness. It's strength." Lena, still holding the photograph, raised it to the light. "These boys," she said, her voice trembling with pride, "they grew up in a world that gave them no chances. But they fought, and now they're fighting to be a family. If they can do it, so can you." The crowd roared again, but this time it was different, not just approval, but a promise. The audience, especially the older ones, felt the words of Pacino, De Niro, and Lena touch their own wounds. Many thought of calls they'd put off, letters they hadn't written, reunions they'd never had. Jimmy, sensing the show had reached its peak, stood and raised his hands. "I'm officially declaring this the greatest episode in Jimmy Kimmel Live. History," he shouted, and the crowd laughed, the tension easing slightly. "Al, Bobby, Lena, you're incredible. And I hope this is just the start of your story." The cameras pulled back, the orchestra struck up the closing tune, but Pacino and De Niro didn't rush off. They hugged Lena, then, unexpectedly, turned to the audience and began shaking hands with people in the front rows. The woman from Queens, who'd spoken of her brother, hugged Pacino, whispering thank you. A veteran with a faded tattoo on his arm shook De Niro's hand firmly, nodding as if words weren't needed. As the show ended and the audience began to disperse, the studio buzzed with chatter. People shared their reactions, some already calling loved ones, others standing in quiet reflection. Outside, under Hollywood's neon glow, the air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt, and the city sounds, car horns, tourist laughter, mingled with a sense that something had shifted. The next day, the news of Pacino and De Niro dominated headlines. Brothers reunited, the truth that shocked Hollywood, newspapers proclaimed. Social media buzzed with memes, theories, and heartfelt posts. But for those in the studio and the millions watching at home, it was more than a scoop. It was a reminder that even in a world where truth often gets lost in the noise, one voice, calm but resolute, can change everything. Pacino and De Niro returned to their lives, but now together. They began working on a documentary about their family, the Bronx, and how art became their salvation. Lena became their guide, sharing memories that brought their past to life. But most importantly, they were brothers again, laughing over old jokes, arguing about who made better spaghetti, and planning a future they'd long avoided. In the Bronx, at the old building where they once played in a gritty courtyard, someone left flowers by the door. No one knew who, maybe a fan, maybe a neighbor who remembered those two kids. But the flowers were there, a symbol that even small steps toward truth can leave a mark. The man in the checkered shirt, whose name remained unknown, went home that night and wrote a letter. Not to his brother, who was gone, but to his brother's children. In it, he poured out his love, his regret, his story. He didn't know if they'd read it or forgive him. But he sent it. And in that act, there was a beginning.